A month ago, I was desperate for work. I applied for a job with a private security firm. The hiring process was surprisingly fast. I filled out a basic application online, and the next day, a man in a dark gray suit interviewed me. He did not ask about my previous experience. He only asked if I had family in the area, if I had a girlfriend, and if I was comfortable working alone at night. I told him I lived completely alone and needed the money. He smiled, handed me a uniform, and told me I was hired. They assigned me to a massive, sprawling hospital complex. It is a huge facility with multiple wings and separate buildings connected by elevated walkways. My assignment was very specific. I was assigned to guard the 4th floor of the East Wing. The East Wing is an older section of the hospital. The 4th floor had been entirely shut down. When I stepped off the elevator on my first night, I saw that the entire double-door entrance to the floor was sealed off. It was covered in thick, heavy, milky white plastic sheeting. The edges were taped completely to the walls, floor, and ceiling with heavy silver duct tape. Across the center of the plastic, wide strips of red warning tape were crossed in an X. The tape had bold black letters printed on it. It read, "Caution. Asbestos abatement in progress. Authorized personnel only. Strict biohazard protocols apply." My job was to sit at a small folding desk position directly in front of that plastic barrier. I was scheduled for midnight until 8 in the morning. The supervisor told me my only responsibility was to make sure nobody tampered with the plastic and nobody tried to enter the floor. He said the chemicals and dust inside were highly toxic and told me to stay in my chair, do my hourly radio checks, and keep people away. For the first week, it was the most boring job I have ever had. The hallway was completely empty. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed constantly. I brought a book and read it cover to cover. Once an hour, I pressed the button on my radio, said my unit number, and reported that the 4th floor was secure. The dispatcher would acknowledge, and then the silence would return. I liked the quiet, and I needed the paycheck, so I did not ask questions. Then, the sound started. It happened during my second week, around 3 in the morning. I was sitting at the desk, fighting to keep my eyes open. The hospital was completely silent. Then, I heard a noise coming from the other side of the heavy plastic sheeting. It was a sharp, rhythmic squeak. It sounded exactly like a rusty wheel turning on a hard tile floor. It would squeak, pause, and squeak again. I recognized the sound immediately. When I was a teenager, I spent a few weeks in a hospital recovering from a bad accident. I knew the sound of a 4-pole being dragged across the floor. I sat up straight in my chair. I looked at the milky plastic. I could not see through it. It was too thick, and the lights on the other side were off. I stood up and walked close to the barrier. I listened. The squeaking sound moved slowly down the hidden hallway and then stopped. A few seconds later, I heard crying. It was incredibly muffled by the thick plastic, but it was unmistakable. It was the soft, exhausted, broken sobbing of a small child. It sounded like a child who had been crying for hours and had no energy left. I stood there, frozen. My heart started beating faster. I did not know what to do. The sign clearly said the area was a toxic hazard zone. There was no reason for a child to be in there. I leaned my face close to the plastic. "Hello," I said. My voice echoed in the empty hallway. "Is someone in there?" The crying stopped instantly. The squeaking wheel did not return, and the floor went completely silent. I sat back down at my desk. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself that sound travels in weird ways through large buildings. The hospital has air vents and elevator shafts. The crying probably came from the maternity ward on the second floor, traveling up the pipes. I convinced myself I was just tired and hearing things. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it was not just sounds. It was shortly after 2 in the morning. I was drinking a cup of coffee. I heard a soft rustling sound. It sounded like a hand rubbing against the inside of the plastic sheeting. I looked up. The hallway light above my desk cast a slight glare on the plastic. But from the other side, pushing against the milky surface, I saw a shadow. It was small, AMD was the height of a 7-year-old child. The shadow stood directly in front of the double doors. Then, 2 small hands pressed against the plastic. I saw the distinct outline of small fingers pushing the material outward. The plastic bowed slightly toward me under the pressure. I dropped my coffee cup. It spilled all over the floor, but I did not care. I watched as another small shadow joined the first one. Then a third. They were pressing their hands against the barrier. They did not speak or even bang on the doors. They just pressed their hands against the plastic, standing in the dark. I backed away from the desk. My hands were shaking. I reached for my radio, but I stopped. What was I going to report? That children were in the asbestos zone. I am not a brave person. But I am also not a skeptic. I know that hospitals are places where a lot of people pass away. I know that old buildings hold on to things. I stared at those small shadows, and my mind jumped to the most logical conclusion a terrified person could reach. The floor was haunted. I assumed the 4th floor used to be the pediatric wing. I assumed that children who had died there decades ago were trapped in a space, repeating their final days, pushing their 4 poles through the dark. It made sense to me. It explained the sounds, the shadows, and it explained why the floor was completely sealed off. Maybe the asbestos warning was just a cover story to keep people away from a haunted section of the hospital. I just stood against the far wall of the hallway and watched. After a few minutes, the small hands withdrew. The plastic smoothed out, and the shadows faded away into the dark. When my shift ended at 8 in the morning, I was exhausted. The morning guard arrived to relieve me. I handed him the radio and quickly walked to the elevators. I went down to the ground floor. There is a small cafeteria near the main lobby where the hospital staff gets coffee before their shifts begin. I bought a black coffee and sat at a small table in the corner. A few minutes later, An older woman in light blue scrubs sat down at the table next to mine. She had a badge that identified her as a head nurse. She looked incredibly tired. She was staring blankly at her coffee cup. I decided to ask her. I needed to know if my theory was correct. "Excuse me," I said quietly. She looked up at me. She noticed my security uniform. Her expression tightened slightly. "Yes?" she asked. "I work the night shift," I said. "I am assigned to the 4th floor of the East Wing. The one sealed off for asbestos." The moment I mentioned the 4th floor, all the color drained from her face. Her eyes darted around the cafeteria, checking to see if anyone was sitting near us. She gripped her coffee cup tightly. "What about it?" she asked. Her voice was suddenly very defensive. "I was just wondering," I said, trying to sound casual. "Was that floor used for pediatrics in the past? Did it used to be the children's ward?" The head nurse stared at me. Her breathing became shallow. She looked genuinely terrified, then she leaned across the small space between our tables. "Listen to me very carefully," she whispered. Her voice was shaking, but her tone was incredibly harsh. "You get paid to sit in a chair. You do not get paid to ask questions." I was taken aback. "I just saw some things, and I heard." "I don't care what you heard," she interrupted, cutting me off completely.